A dying rock star suspended 200 feet above the Osbourne mansion for 2 hours. That's how long a team of air ambulance medics pounded on Ozzy Osbourne's chest before the Prince of Darkness finally slipped beyond the veil at 76. Sharon Osbourne has now broken her silence, spelling out every frantic minute, every jolt of the defibrillator, and the whispered request Ozzy made as they wheeled him toward the helicopter. Metallica, Elton John, and even Drake lit up the internet with heartbreak, but buried beneath the tidal wave of tributes was one chilling clue fans almost missed. Ozzy's final on-stage words, spoken less than 3 weeks before he died, seemed to predict the very moment. Tonight, we're piecing that timeline together, from the collapse in Buckinghamshire to the global vigil that turned every speaker on the planet into a monument. Stay with us because the most shocking detail of Ozzy's farewell is still to come. The panic hit at 10:29 a.m. on an otherwise quiet Buckinghamshire morning. 1 second Ozzy was cracking a grim little joke about his Tin Man spine, the next he slumped forward, eyes half-lidded, skin the color of ash on an extinguished cigarette. Sharon's phone was already in her hand before he hit the carpet. Within 8 minutes, the whir of a Thames Valley air ambulance rotor blasted the rose garden apart, scattering kettles like confetti for a wedding nobody wanted. Paramedics sprinted through French doors, dumping gear bags that clanked with vials and paddles, and dropped to their knees beside the fallen Prince of Darkness. They worked on him for 2 brutal hours. Defibrillator pads pressed against his scar-laced chest. Epinephrine syringes plunged into a vein that once pulsed to Crazy Train. Intubation tube threaded between teeth still stained from late-night Guinness binges. Through it all, Sharon and the kids stood stubbornly at the doorway. No tears, just white-knuckled hands and a silence so thick you could feel it pressing on your eardrums. The only words anyone remembers came from Sharon. "Give him everything you've got." And they did. 32 shocks, countless compressions, a flood of meds, until the attending doctor finally whispered, "Time." Outside, news had already leaked. By the time the medics called it, a loose ring of die-hard fans was gathering at the estate gates, phones raised, praying the rumors were just another hoax. Inside, a different kind of quiet settled, a hush so absolute it swallowed the beeps, the hums, the mechanical whine of machines powering down. Sharon knelt, brushed a strand of sweat-soaked hair from Ozzy's forehead, and breathed, "Rest now, love." No theatrics, no wails, just a farewell fit for the man who once claimed he'd outlive cockroaches. Yet the question hanging in every room wasn't why the ambulance arrived, it was why Ozzy's body finally quit fighting at all. Because this morning's collapse wasn't an isolated strike, it was the last chapter in a 5-year siege that began with one catastrophic misstep in Los Angeles. 5 years of absolute hell. That's how Ozzy summed up the spiral that started one foggy night in Los Angeles, 2019. A simple stumble in his hallway shattered a neck vertebra, setting off a grotesque domino run of surgeries, 4 in total, each one riskier than the last. The second operation went sideways, a nicked artery, clot cascade, and a tumor surgeons hadn't planned to find. Recovery morphine blurred into pneumonia, then blood thinners spawned more complications. For a man who'd walked off tour bus crashes and bat-bite headlines, this was the first fight he couldn't swagger through. When the family finally revealed his Parkinson's diagnosis in early 2020, tabloids pounced, but insiders knew the real torment wasn't the tremor. It was the nerve damage from that broken neck. Ozzy couldn't turn his head without fire shooting down his spine. He called it living inside an electrified coffin. Physical therapy sessions left him shaking, gasping, furious at a body that had once absorbed decades of onstage chaos like it was nothing. Yet in interviews, he still cracked jokes, blaming old age for rusty bolts while waving away pity. "I'm virtually crippled," he admitted, but followed it with a grin. "Still not dead, am I?" Every time fans counted him out, he'd pop up on Instagram, silver hair tousled, holding court about new riffs and future gigs. He was rebuilding himself, screw by titanium screw, determined to make one last roar in the city that birthed Black Sabbath. Which brings us to July 5th, Birmingham, when Ozzy wheeled onto a throne, eyes blazing, and hinted the end was closer than anyone dared believe. July 5th, Birmingham, Ozzy's hometown and spiritual launchpad. The charity bill read like a Hall of Fame roll call, but the only name fans cared about was flashed in crimson lights above a black lacquer throne. When roadies rolled him out, the roar felt seismic, and Ozzy, leaning on a skull-handled cane, grinned like the devil who just picked the lock to heaven. His voice was ragged, sure, but every rasp landed like gospel. Iron Man, no more tears, and, for the first time in a decade, changes. Mid-song, he paused, stared across 40,000 raised phones, and murmured into the mic, "Thank you, forever." It barely registered in the arena's thunder, yet the front row faces went pale. Something about the way he dragged out "forever" felt final, like graffiti scrawled on a ticking clock. When the last chord faded, Ozzy lifted two fingers in that signature devil horn salute, pressed them to his lips, and whispered to the band, "That's the one." Nobody knew if he meant the set list, the night, or the life. But 3 weeks later, every replay of that moment turned prophetic. TikTok blew up with freeze frames, fans lip-reading those muted words, arguing whether he'd scripted his own exit. And while the internet dissected clues, a darker wave was already rising. Cheap click farms pushing phony Ozzy dead thumbnails that would muddy the truth before it even broke. The internet did what it does best. Turned tragedy into a tug of war before the truth was even cold. 3 days before the real collapse, lurid thumbnails screaming "R.I.P. Ozzy" flooded YouTube. AI-stitched voiceovers, grainy paparazzi shots, and ad-stuffed captions milked for every penny. Fans lurched between outrage and relief as reliable outlets debunked each claim, while click farm channels racked up millions of views on recycled concert clips. Kelly Osbourne finally snapped, posting a furious Instagram story begging people to stop spreading garbage about her dad before she had to find out from strangers if he was still breathing. Snopes took the unprecedented step of red-flagging multiple hoax reports, but the damage was done. By the time the genuine news hit, half the fandom couldn't tell if it was another cash grab prank or a nightmare come true. Confusion morphed into collective guilt, because every share, every skeptical retweet had helped bury the real warning signs in noise. And that's why the first voices to rise above the static weren't journalists at all. They were the titans of rock, each scrambling to claim a sliver of farewell before the algorithm swallowed the moment whole. The announcement detonated across social media like a cymbal crash in an empty hall. Sudden, deafening, impossible to ignore. Tony Iommi needed just 2 words. "My brother." That was it. No hashtags, no photos. Yet the gravity of 55 years together vibrated between those syllables harder than any Sabbath riff. Geezer Butler followed with a thread of midnight studio memories, cigar smoke curling around bass strings, Ozzy cackling over a freshly written Paranoid. Bill Ward, the heartbeat everyone forgets to credit, simply wrote, "We chased his light." Then came Zakk Wylde, Ozzy's axe-slinging godson, posting a black-and-white selfie, eyes swollen, captioned, "Beyond forever, boss." Within minutes, Metallica thundered in. "You taught us fearlessness and chaos. Thank you for both." Elton John, never stingy with words, called him a legend who somehow made madness feel like home. Even Drake slid into the feed. No slick caption, just a shot of him alone on the Black Sabbath bridge at midnight, pouring a silent sip over the rail. The shockwaves refused to stay inside rock's borders. Jason Momoa live-streamed through red-rimmed eyes, whispering that, "Ozzy showed me how to roar before I could even speak." Youngblood vowed every note he belts will forever carry the Prince's echo. Questlove saluted the blueprint of heavy, reminding drummers everywhere who drew the first map. Flavor Flav kept it spare. Much love, rest easy. And somehow those 4 words landed heavier than a eulogy. Across the ocean, Def Leppard slipped a rogue verse of changes into their encore and let 18,000 strangers finish the chorus in Ozzy's honor. Yet for all that star-powered grief, fans still felt like spectators at someone else's wake, until Sharon Osbourne broke the silence with a midnight voice note that slammed the whole world back into the front row. At 12:07 a.m. London time, Sharon Osbourne resurfaced. No glossy press release, just a single black heart emoji on X that felt like a church bell tolling across cyberspace. 15 minutes later, she dropped a 2-minute voice note, raw and unedited, her accent trembling on the edges. "He waited until all 3 kids were home," she began, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'm ready, love." Sharon's recounting was clinical and crushing in equal measure. The medics, she said, gave him absolutely everything: 32 shocks, adrenaline, even a perfusion pump we'd never seen before. At one point, when the doctor asked if they should cease compressions, Sharon barked back, "Again." You could almost hear the defibrillator whine in her pause. Then came the whisper that split a million hearts. As the team wheeled Ozzy toward the helicopter, he tugged Sharon's sleeve and rasped, "Play me out with Sabbath." Not goodbye, not I love you, but a setlist request from a man whose life was measured in riffs. Sharon obliged on the spot. Jack fumbled his phone, queued up Planet Caravan, and those cosmic chords spilled into the dawn while rotors kicked up dust around the garden. Sharon ended the message with no grand philosophical bow, just a sigh. He's gone, and the world is quieter, but it won't stay that way for long. Turn it up for him. She didn't need to ask twice. By sunrise, speakers, earbuds, and stadium PA systems from Birmingham to Buenos Aires were screaming Ozzy back into the atmosphere, kicking off the global vigil that proved the Prince of Darkness still commands the light. Sunrise over Birmingham painted the Black Sabbath bridge in muted gold, but fans had already turned it crimson. Vinyl sleeves, wilted roses, and hand-scrawled notes carpeted the walkway. Somewhere amid the wax dripped a candle shaped like a miniature bat, ears singed, wings melting. By noon, the railing was a collage of Sharpie farewells. "See you on the other side. Thanks for the loud." And one shaky confession from a teenage girl, "Your screams kept me alive." The tribute spread faster than any tour announcement ever had. In Sao Paulo, a downtown bar blasted Paranoid on loop, while patrons swapped stories about first mosh pits and broken stage diving bones. In Tokyo, midnight karaoke booths erupted in off-key Mr. Crowley solos, phone flashlights waving like lighters of old. Spotify reported a 1,400% spike in Crazy Train streams within 24 hours. Playlists titled For Ozzy vaulted to #1 in 8 countries, clobbering every algorithmic darling on the platform. TikTok turned into a digital seance. Gen Z kids, some born after the Osbournes left MTV, posted shaky clips of themselves discovering War Pigs for the first time, faces snapping from disbelief to pure, unfiltered joy when the riff kicked in. One viral video showed a classroom of high schoolers air drumming the chorus. The teacher simply wrote "Homework, listen" on the whiteboard and hit play. That's Ozzy's legacy in sharp relief. It isn't just platinum plaques or reality TV catchphrases. It's permission to be loud, to be weird, to survive your own chaos and spin it into an anthem someone else will need someday. The Prince of Darkness didn't leave behind silence. He left a map of noise that leads straight to freedom. And with every candle lit, every TikTok duet, every busker growling Iron Man in a subway tunnel, that map grows clearer, etched in shared decibels rather than marble. So when the volume finally dipped on that first night without him, one truth rang louder than encore chants. Ozzy Osbourne never belonged to just one generation, genre, or continent. He belonged to anyone brave enough to crank the dial until the neighbors complained. And judging by the roar still circling the globe, the neighbors haven't had a quiet minute yet. For a man who loved to call himself the Prince of Darkness, look at the light he left behind. Stadium chants tearing through the night, candlelit bridges blooming with vinyl, teenagers discovering riffs older than their parents. Ozzy bent the world toward louder, weirder, freer, proving you can stumble, fall, break every rule in the book, and still turn the wreckage into a song that saves someone else. Now the spotlight swings to you. Which tribute punched you in the gut? Was it Iommi's 2-word eulogy, Sharon's midnight confession, or a stranger's shaky TikTok that made you hit repeat? And what's the first riff, lyric, or reality TV moment that tattooed Ozzy onto your life? Drop it below. I'm reading everything. If you're hungry for more chaos, the next video dives headfirst into Ozzy's wildest onstage legends, the Bat, the Alamo, the unscripted mayhem that forged a myth. Hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss the next ride, because this train isn't slowing down, not even close.